Hello, this is my 1961 Ford F-100 pickup truck, and today I'm going to give a quick overview on the installation of the Crown Vic front suspension. A lot of people refer to these suspensions as the Crown Vic front suspension. However, the Mercury, Grand Marquis, and the Lincoln Town Car have the exact same thing. As long as it's a 2003 or newer, that will work for a Ford F-100 swap. Just verify when you're at the auto salvage yard that looks something like this, and that is what you're going to want for your swap. One of the most important things you'll need to decide when installing a Crown Vic suspension is what type of kit you're going to use to install the suspension itself to your frame. So for this build, I went with the Gateway Performance Suspension kit. It's a boxing plate, which is right here. This whole section is a steel box that they provide, and it has tubes on each end of the box, and those tubes have holes in them that allow the large bolt to go from the bottom and basically bolt that entire suspension to the frame itself. One really cool thing about this kit is that these tubes are actually from Ford, so the bolted joint is the exact same as what is used on the actual Crown Victoria. So that's a really good and robust way to mount this suspension to your chassis. It's the exact same way that Ford did it back when they originally designed this. So the Gateway suspension kit has some really good instructions that shows how to install this exactly, which is a really good reference. However, another tool that I used was the YouTube video that they made. I believe their YouTube video covers a 1967 to 1972 Ford F-100, so it's a little bit newer style F-100. However, the procedure is very similar. The main difference between the 67 to 72 and this kit, which is the 1957 to 64, is that the installation boxes here are a little bit shorter for this kit because the frame is not as tall. So although they are a little bit different designs, the process that you follow is very similar. So that YouTube video is also very helpful. I'll make sure to link that in the description. When removing the original front suspension, you do have to cut away the brackets that originally held the front shocks. So right in this area on the frame, there will be a larger bracket that comes up that is riveted to the frame. So you do need to cut those rivets to remove that bracket. And then there's also some bracketry in the back here that held the rear of the front leaf spring, and then also some smaller brackets up in this area that held the leaf spring that could be removed as well. So the instructions will show you, once you have your axle center line marked, you have to basically measure a certain distance forward of that and then a certain distance rearward of that will establish where you need to cut the frame. And then once you get the frame cut, it will look something like this picture right here. So just taking off the top ledge and the bottom ledge of that C-channel frame. If it's a 67 to 72, it is a little bit different how you have to cut the frame, I believe. So make sure you look at the instructions if you're doing one of those trucks. The Gateway video covers how important it is to make sure that this suspension is square to your chassis. So I did a lot of measurements to make sure that it was square. You can do measurements from these posts to, the front of the frame. You can do it to these oval cutouts here. You can do diagonal measurements from one side to the other side of the frame. I did a lot of different measurements like that just to make sure that this thing was as square as I could get it. Definitely took my time with that, just made sure that it was nice and true. And after I was sure that it was exactly where I wanted, that's when I took some clamps. Clamps went right about here, and it locked the boxes to the frame. I did clamp on each side, and then from there, I got ready to do my welding. So the welds basically went all the way around the boxes here. Same on the back side. And then also, a little bit hard to tell, from this point all the way to about here, all the way across, that is also welded. on the top surface and then also down here on the bottom surface. Now I did go by afterwards with a grinder and kind of just clean up the welds and make it look more like a factory finish. That's why, for example, there is a weld right here, but you can't tell. And then all the way down, like I said, on the top and the bottom here, there's also welds that I ended up grinding away, so you can't really tell that. Now this specific kit did come with some plates to basically box in your frame, both forward and rearward of the actual boxing plate itself. So for my case, I didn't have any frame forward of the boxing plate to box in because there already is a sort of gusset piece that is factory from Ford. So I could have added a plate back here. They do provide one. However, I would have had to massage it a little bit because it didn't seem to line up perfectly with my frame. So it would have taken some time to kind of make that fit and install it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on the frame and see how much it twists under heavy acceleration. But right now I'm going to move forward without it, and then later on, if I think it's going to be useful to have later on to kind of beef up the frame, I'll add it on. But for now, I think this is what I'm going to move forward with. The lower control arm also has to mount to these brackets here. These are provided in the Gateway kit, and the way that I installed them is I bolted the Crown Vic suspension to the frame, and then I installed my lower control arms, and then I installed the bushings onto those control arms. And there is a modification that you have to do to these bushings, so take a look at the Gateway video. It's not very hard. Basically, you have to just cut some welds and rotate the orientation of this bushing and then re-weld it back together. It's not too bad, but after you do that, you can bolt the bracket that Gateway provides to the suspension bracket, and then that will basically establish the position for the bracket. And then from there, just make sure that it's sitting nice and snug against the frame, and then you can do your welding. Mine did not fit perfect. I did have a little bit of a gap between the frame and the bracket here up front, so I had to add a little extra piece of 1/4-inch steel to kind of just stiffen that up and fill in that gap. And then I also made a custom little bracket here that kind of stiffens it up. The Gateway kit does come with a piece that is supposed to be intended for right here, but for whatever reason on my chassis, this piece was not kind of fitting properly, so I ended up just making my own, and it serves the same purpose. It just kind of stiffens this bracket up a little bit. So as far as the suspension goes, I did take a lot of time, as you can see, kind of cleaning it up. So what I started with was the front kind of cross member here. I cleaned that up with some aluminum cleaner, and I painted it with some duplicolor engine enamel with ceramic from O'Reilly's. For the suspension itself, I did get a lot of new components just to kind of freshen it up. I got some new control arms from Rock Auto. The shocks are QA1 shocks. They make a kit specifically for the Crown Vic suspension. So it's pretty much a bolt-in, plug-and-play suspension kit here. I'm really happy with that. I got that from Summit Racing. And the brakes here I got from Rock Auto. These are power stop calipers, and these rotors are actually from a Ford Mustang. So I decided to use a kit made by Range Industries that takes this caliper and it moves it a little bit more rearward, and that allows room to use a larger brake rotor. So this rotor is 14 inches in diameter. I believe the Crown Vic one is probably somewhere around 12 inches. So they claim that if you use this kit, you can use the larger 14-inch Mustang brakes, which gives you about 20% more stopping power. So I'm really excited to see how that works. Here's a better look at that Range Industries bracket. It takes that caliper and it moves it back just enough to allow clearance for that 14-inch Mustang rotor. So Range Industries claims that you can use any Ford Mustang rotor for the years 2007 to 2014. So these rotors I picked up, they are made by Raisbestos, and they fit pretty well. I did have some issues with the brake pad fitment, so I did end up buying some new Bosch brake pads for these calipers here. And the issue I was having is when you install the pads into the caliper, and then you go to install that caliper onto the rotor itself, the pads were interfering with the rotor. In other words, the pads weren't able to open up far enough to allow the installation. So I found a video that Range posted about that issue, and what we're saying is they recommend using your used Crown Vic brake pads because that will give you a little bit extra clearance that you need to install the caliper. However, I didn't have my used pads anymore, so what I ended up having to do is I took one pad per caliper and I put it on a belt sander and just lightly sanded it down. I took probably about 1 millimeter off of the caliper itself, and that was enough to give me clearance to install that caliper onto the rotor. And here's a shot showing how tight the clearances are between the rotor and the actual caliper. So Range does provide a small shim that you can use between the caliper bracket and their bracket to kind of shim this left or right to get the best clearances that you're looking for. Even with using that shim, I did have some clearancing issues between the caliper bracket and the rotor. So I did have to take a rotary tool and take a tiny bit of material off of the caliper bracket, just down here a little bit. But not a big deal. It only took me probably about 5 minutes to do. And after I did that, this whole rotor spins over nice and easy now. The sway bar itself is the same one that came out of the Crown Victoria as well. So the installation was not too bad here. Basically, I just took the same mounts that were used on the Crown Victoria chassis and I drilled some holes in the bottom of the frame on each side here and bolted that up. So that was a pretty straightforward process. The bar itself does get pretty close to the gussets here on the frame. There's probably about 1/8 of an inch of clearance, so I'll keep an eye on that, but I think it's going to be okay. If you're not familiar with how the engine mounts to a normal Crown Victoria, basically the engine mounts here and here. So one thing I was kind of concerned about is how I was going to handle mounting my engine to this suspension. I do plan to use a Ford Godzilla engine. So I found a website called Outcast Autoworks. If you Google that, it'll show right up. And they have a lot of really cool engine mounting solutions for the Crown Victoria front suspension. So here is what the Godzilla ones look like. They bolt right to those same locations that are used on normal Crown Victoria, and they adapt to whatever engine you're looking for. They have a couple different options. Like I said, I have the Godzilla engine, so this here is for the Godzilla. But they also have a engine mount solution for the Coyote. I think they have a solution for the Ford FE block, and maybe a couple other ones too. So take a look at their website, and they might have something that you could use for your build. I still have some work to do to figure out how I'm going to handle the power steering lines that go up to the power steering pump. But one thing I did find on the internet was Range Industries does sell a small block that you can bolt into the power steering rack here. And it has some AN fittings that are right here, and then you can easily attach some AN lines to the power steering rack that then could go up to your power steering pump. So I kind of still have to figure out how I'm going to lay out the fittings, but that is something I am keeping in mind. I might pick that up if I end up. So that's the general overview of the Crown Vic installation on my 1961 Ford F-100. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you learned something. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and thanks guys for watching.